Story 1. The Whispering Woods. Deep in the heart of the Whispering Woods, there was a legend that every villager in the nearby town knew by heart. The forest, with its dense, dark canopy and twisting, ancient trees, was said to be alive with whispers. These whispers were not the gentle rustle of leaves or the calls of nocturnal creatures, but voices soft, insistent, and otherworldly. It all started centuries ago when a group of settlers decided to make the woods their home. They built a small community at the forest's edge, unaware of the dark presence that resided within. For years, everything was peaceful, but then people began to disappear. The first was a young girl named Emily. She was just 5 years old and had wandered into the woods chasing a butterfly. Despite extensive searches, Emily was never found. Her mother claimed to hear her daughter's voice calling out from the forest every night, but no one believed her. Soon, others went missing, and the whispers grew louder. One day, a brave man named Thomas decided to venture into the woods to uncover the truth. Armed with a lantern and a sturdy walking stick, he stepped into the forest at dusk. As he moved deeper into the woods, the whispers began. At first, they were faint, almost indistinguishable from the natural sounds of the forest. But as night fell, they grew clearer and more urgent. Turn back, they seemed to say, leave this place. Thomas ignored the warnings and pressed on. He came across an old, abandoned cabin deep in the forest. The door was ajar, and a flickering light shone from within. As he approached, the whispers intensified, now sounding like a chorus of voices, pleading and angry. He stepped inside the cabin and saw a sight that chilled him to the bone. The walls were covered in ancient runes, and in the center of the room was a large, circular stone with strange symbols etched into it. As he examined the stone, the whispers became screams. The air grew thick, and a cold, dark presence enveloped him. Thomas tried to leave, but the door slammed shut. He was trapped. The voices grew louder, their words now clear and filled with malevolence. Join us, they demanded. Become one with the forest. Desperately, Thomas swung his lantern, hoping to break through the door. But it was no use. The light flickered and died, and he was plunged into darkness. The whispers consumed him, filling his mind with terrifying visions. He saw the faces of those who had disappeared, their eyes hollow and their mouths open in silent screams. In his final moments, Thomas understood the truth. The forest was not just alive with whispers, it was a prison for lost souls, trapped and tormented by an ancient evil. With a final, anguished cry, he succumbed to the darkness. The next morning, the villagers found Thomas's lifeless body at the edge of the forest. His hair had turned white, and his face was frozen in an expression of sheer terror. From that day on, no one dared to enter the Whispering Woods. The legend grew, and the whispers continued, a haunting reminder of the forest's dark power. Story 2. The Haunting of Blackwood Manor. Blackwood Manor stood on the outskirts of the village, an imposing structure with a dark history. The manor had been abandoned for decades, its once grand halls now filled with dust and decay. The villagers spoke of the place in hushed tones, warning outsiders to stay away. The legend began with the tragic story of the Blackwood family. Many years ago, Lord Blackwood, his wife Lady Evelyn, and their 3 children lived in the manor. One stormy night, a fire broke out, consuming the manor and everyone inside. The exact cause of the fire was never determined, but it was rumored that Lady Evelyn, driven mad by grief over the loss of her youngest child to illness, had started the blaze. Since that night, strange occurrences plagued the manor. Locals reported seeing ghostly figures in the windows, hearing disembodied cries, and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread near the property. Despite these warnings, the manor attracted thrill seekers and paranormal investigators, eager to uncover its secrets. One such investigator was Alice, a young woman with a passion for the supernatural. Determined to document the hauntings, she made her way to Blackwood Manor armed with her camera and recording equipment. As she approached the manor, a chill ran down her spine, but she pressed on, eager to prove the existence of spirits. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. Alice set up her equipment in the grand hall, where the fire had supposedly started. As night fell, the manor seemed to come alive. Shadows danced on the walls, and whispers echoed through the empty corridors. Alice captured strange orbs of light on her camera and recorded faint, ghostly voices. She followed the sounds, leading her deeper into the manor. The temperature dropped sharply, and she could see her breath forming misty clouds in the air. Suddenly, a door slammed shut behind her, and she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. Alice captured strange orbs of light on her camera and recorded faint, ghostly voices. She followed the sounds, leading her deeper into the manor. The temperature dropped sharply, and she could see her breath forming misty clouds in the air. Suddenly, a door slammed shut behind her, and she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. The basement was a labyrinth of old wine cellars and storage rooms. In the far corner, she found a hidden door. Pushing it open, she discovered a small room filled with children's toys and old photographs. The room seemed untouched by time, a stark contrast to the rest of the decaying manor. Among the toys, she found a diary belonging to Lady Evelyn. The diary detailed her descent into madness, her overwhelming grief over her child's death, and her belief that the house was cursed. On the final page, Evelyn wrote about her plan to set the manor ablaze, believing it was the only way to free her family from the curse. As Alice read the last entry, she felt a sudden rush of cold air and heard the unmistakable sound of a child's laughter. The toys began to move on their own, and the whispers turned into anguished cries. Desperate to escape, Alice fled the basement, but the spirits pursued her, their presence growing stronger. She stumbled through the halls, the ghosts of the Blackwood family appearing before her eyes, their faces twisted in sorrow. They reached out to her, their touch icy and filled with despair. With a final burst of energy, Alice burst through the front door and into the night. Gasping for breath, she looked back at the manor, now eerily silent. She knew she had to share her findings, to tell the world about the spirits trapped within Blackwood Manor. But deep down, she also knew that the ghosts would never rest, forever haunting the place where they had met their tragic end. Story 3: The Phantom Train. In the quiet town of Ravenswood, nestled between misty hills and dense forests, there was a legend that chilled the bones of anyone who dared to listen. The tale of the Phantom Train was well known among the locals, a ghostly locomotive that appeared without warning, carrying the souls of the lost and damned. It all began in the early 1900s when the Ravenswood Express, a luxurious passenger train, was the pride of the town. It connected the sleepy village with the bustling city, providing a vital link for trade and travel. But one fateful night, disaster struck. The Ravenswood Express was on its usual route when it encountered an unexpected storm. The rain poured down in torrents, and the tracks became slick and treacherous. As the train approached a steep curve near the old Black Hollow Bridge, the engineer struggled to maintain control. The wheels screeched against the rails, but it was too late. The train derailed, plummeting into the ravine below. All passengers and crew perished in the tragic accident. In the days following the crash, rescue teams searched the wreckage, but not all bodies were recovered. The locals mourned their lost loved ones, and the town was shrouded in grief. The Black Hollow Bridge was declared unsafe and was abandoned, left to rot and be reclaimed by nature. Years passed, and the memory of the Ravenswood Express began to fade, replaced by whispers of a haunting. It started with strange sightings near the old bridge. People reported hearing the distant sound of a train whistle, despite the tracks being long out of use. Others claimed to see a ghostly train speeding through the night, its lights dim and its carriages filled with shadowy figures. One evening, a young man named Jack decided to investigate the legend. armed with a flashlight and a sense of adventure. He made his way to Black Hollow Bridge. The air was thick with fog, and an eerie silence enveloped the area. As he stood on the decaying bridge, he heard the unmistakable sound of a train approaching. Jack's heart pounded as he saw the phantom train materialize out of the mist. It was an old steam engine, its exterior rusted and worn. The windows were dark, but he could see the faint outlines of passengers staring back at him. Their eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and their faces were twisted in expressions of despair. Frozen in place, Jack watched as the train passed through him, leaving a trail of icy cold air in its wake. He felt a surge of sadness and fear, the emotions of the lost souls who were trapped on the train. As the last carriage vanished into the fog, he heard a voice whisper his name, sending shivers down his spine. Determined to understand what he had witnessed, Jack delved into the history of the Ravenswood Express. He discovered old newspaper articles and diaries that detailed the lives of the passengers. Many had unfinished business or unresolved conflicts, their spirits unable to find peace after the tragic accident. Realizing that the phantom train was a manifestation of their restless souls, Jack made it his mission to help them find closure. He reached out to the descendants of the victims, uncovering long-buried secrets and resolving old grievances. One by one, the spirits found peace, their appearances on the phantom train growing less frequent. In time, the sightings of the phantom train ceased altogether. The town of Ravenswood began to heal, the legend of the ghostly locomotive becoming a distant memory. Jack, now an old man, often visited the bridge, leaving flowers as a tribute to those who had perished. But on certain misty nights, if one listened closely, the faint sound of a train whistle could still be heard echoing through the hills, a reminder of the phantom train and the souls it had once carried, forever etched into the history of Ravenswood. Story 4. The Cursed Mirror. Deep in the heart of an antique shop, hidden away from prying eyes, was a mirror unlike any other. This mirror, with its ornate, gilded frame and eerie, reflective surface, was said to be cursed. For centuries, it had passed from owner to owner, leaving a trail of misfortune and terror in its wake. The mirror's dark tale began in the 18th century with a renowned craftsman named Lorenzo. Lorenzo was a gifted artisan, famous for his beautiful mirrors that adorned the homes of the wealthy. But one day, he received a commission that would change his life forever. A mysterious nobleman requested a mirror unlike any Lorenzo had ever made, promising a handsome reward for its completion. Eager to prove his skill, Lorenzo worked tirelessly on the mirror. As he polished the final piece, he noticed something strange. Reflected in the glass was not his workshop, but a dark, shadowy figure watching him intently. Shaken, Lorenzo tried to dismiss it as a trick of the light, but the figure persisted, appearing every time he looked into the mirror. Disturbed by the apparition, Lorenzo completed the mirror and delivered it to the nobleman. However, the nobleman vanished without a trace, leaving the mirror behind. Lorenzo, now cursed by the mirror's dark presence, began to experience a series of tragic events. His family fell ill, his business collapsed, and he was eventually found dead in his workshop, the mirror hanging ominously on the wall. The cursed mirror changed hands many times over the years. Each new owner fell victim to its malevolent influence. Some saw ghostly apparitions, others were driven to madness, and many met untimely deaths. The mirror was eventually locked away in the attic of an old mansion, forgotten by time. Years later, the mansion was inherited by a young woman named Eliza. Unaware of the mirror's dark history, she decided to explore the attic. Among the dusty relics, she discovered the mirror, its surface covered in grime. Intrigued by its intricate frame, she cleaned it and brought it downstairs. That night, as Eliza prepared for bed, she glanced into the mirror. To her horror, she saw a pale, spectral figure standing behind her. She spun around, but the room was empty. Heart pounding, She turned back to the mirror, only to find the figure now closer, its eyes locked onto hers. Over the following weeks, Eliza was plagued by nightmares and strange occurrences. The figure in the mirror appeared every night, growing more menacing with each encounter. Desperate for answers, she researched the mirror's history and discovered its cursed past. Determined to rid herself of the mirror's influence, she sought the help of a local historian. The historian, an elderly man named Samuel, had heard of the cursed mirror but had never encountered it himself. He agreed to help Eliza and conducted a ritual to break the curse. As he chanted ancient incantations, the mirror began to tremble. The shadowy figure within it writhed and twisted, its ghastly face contorted in rage. With a final, deafening crack, the mirror shattered into 1,000 pieces. The dark presence dissipated, leaving only silence in its wake. Eliza and Samuel sighed with relief, believing the curse to be lifted. However, as they cleaned up the shards, Samuel noticed something unsettling. Among the broken pieces of glass, one fragment still reflected the shadowy figure, its eyes now fixed on Samuel. Realizing the curse had not been fully broken, Samuel knew the mirror's evil would persist. He warned Eliza to be vigilant and to destroy any remnants of the mirror they might find. Eliza, forever haunted by the ordeal, became a guardian against the mirror's return. She scoured antique shops and auctions, searching for any sign of the cursed fragments. Though she never found them all, she vowed to continue her quest, determined to protect others from the mirror's malevolent influence. And so, the legend of the cursed mirror lived on, a chilling reminder of the dark forces that lurk within seemingly innocent objects, waiting for the unwary to unleash their terrible power. Story 5. The Haunting of Hollow Grove. Hollow Grove, a dense forest on the outskirts of a small village, was shrouded in mystery and dread. The villagers spoke in hushed tones about the eerie happenings within its depths. For centuries, it was believed to be haunted by restless spirits, and few dared to venture into its dark, twisted paths. The story of the haunting began with the tragic tale of the Thorne family. In the late 1800s, Samuel Thorne, a wealthy landowner, built a grand estate at the heart of Hollow Grove. Samuel, his wife Margaret, and their 2 children, Emily and Thomas, lived there in opulence and seclusion. But beneath the surface of their idyllic life lay a dark secret. Margaret, a kind and gentle woman, had a gift for communing with spirits. She often held seances and spoke to the dead, much to the dismay of her husband. Samuel, a staunch skeptic, forbade her from continuing her practices, fearing for their family's reputation. Margaret, however, could not resist the pull of the spirits. One stormy night, Margaret held a secret seance in the estate's grand ballroom. She invited several guests, all eager to contact their lost loved ones. As the seance progressed, the room filled with a cold, malevolent presence. The candles flickered and the air grew thick with tension. Suddenly, a dark figure materialized in the center of the room, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The apparition spoke in a guttural voice, warning Margaret to cease her meddling with the spirit world. Terrified, the guests fled the estate, leaving Margaret alone with the entity. In a fit of rage, Samuel confronted his wife, accusing her of bringing ruin upon their family. In the ensuing argument, Margaret collapsed and died from a sudden heart attack. Grief-stricken and blaming himself, Samuel became a recluse. He forbade anyone from entering the estate and eventually abandoned it altogether. The once grand mansion fell into disrepair, and Hollow Grove became a place of fear and superstition. Decades later, a group of adventurous teenagers from the village decided to explore the abandoned Thorne estate. Among them was Lisa, a curious and brave girl who had always been fascinated by the paranormal. Armed with flashlights and a sense of excitement, they made their way through the overgrown paths of Hollow Grove. As they approached the mansion, they felt a sudden drop in temperature. The air grew heavy, and an unsettling silence enveloped them. Undeterred, They pushed open the creaking doors and stepped inside. The interior was a decaying shadow of its former glory, with cobwebs hanging from the chandeliers and dust coating the furniture. Lisa led the group to the grand ballroom, where Margaret had held her fateful séance. As they stood in the center of the room, they felt a chill run down their spines. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness. The flashlights flickered and died, leaving them in pitch blackness. Panicked, they heard whispers echoing through the room. Lisa, trying to calm her friends, urged them to hold hands and stay together. As they huddled in the darkness, a ghostly figure emerged, its form shimmering in the dim light. It was Margaret, her face etched with sorrow and regret. In a soft, mournful voice, Margaret pleaded with them to leave, warning them of the dark force that still haunted the estate. The teenagers, paralyzed with fear, could only watch as the apparition of Samuel appeared beside her, his eyes filled with rage. He blamed the intruders for disturbing his eternal torment and began to advance toward them. Just as the malevolent spirit reached out, Lisa remembered a passage from an old book about exorcising spirits. She began to recite the incantation, her voice trembling but determined. The dark figure recoiled, writhing in agony. The room filled with a blinding light, and the spirits of Margaret and Samuel vanished, leaving a peaceful stillness in their wake. The teenagers fled the mansion, vowing never to return. Hollow Grove remained haunted, but the presence of the Thorns was no longer felt. Lisa, now a believer in the supernatural, dedicated her life to studying and understanding the paranormal, hoping to prevent others from suffering the same fate as the Thorn family. And so, the legend of the haunting of Hollow Grove lived on, a tale of love, loss, and the lingering echoes of the past, forever etched into the memory of the village. Story 6. The Shadow in the Mirror. In the quaint town of Ashwick, nestled amidst rolling hills and ancient oak trees, stood an old manor known as Hawthorne House. The house had a storied past, its walls whispering tales of its many inhabitants over the centuries. But among all the stories, none was as chilling as that of the shadow in the mirror. Years ago, the manor was home to the Bennett family, Dr. Edward Bennett, a respected physician, his wife Eliza, and their daughter Lydia lived a seemingly idyllic life. However, Edward harbored a dark secret. He was obsessed with the occult, spending long nights in his study, poring over ancient texts and conducting strange rituals. One evening, Edward acquired an antique mirror from a mysterious seller. The mirror was rumored to have been cursed, but Edward, blinded by his fascination with the supernatural, dismissed the warnings. He hung the mirror in his study, believing it to be a portal to another realm. As the days passed, Edward's behavior became increasingly erratic. He claimed to see shadowy figures in the mirror, their eyes filled with malevolence. His obsession grew, consuming him entirely. Eliza and Lydia, worried for his sanity, pleaded with him to remove the mirror, but he refused. One fateful night, Edward's obsession reached its peak. During a particularly intense ritual, he attempted to summon the spirits within the mirror. A powerful force erupted from the glass, engulfing the room in darkness. Edward's screams echoed through the manor, and when the light returned, he was gone, leaving only the shattered remains of the mirror behind. Devastated, Eliza and Lydia fled the manor, leaving it to decay. Over the years, the house fell into disrepair, and tales of its haunted past kept people away. The townsfolk believed that Edward's spirit, along with those he had summoned, were trapped within the ruins of Hawthorne House. Decades later, a young couple, James and Anna, moved to Ashwick, drawn by the charm of the town and the allure of restoring the old manor. Ignoring the warnings of the locals, they purchased Hawthorne House and set about renovating it. Among the remnants of the past, they discovered the broken mirror, its glass still shimmering with an eerie light. Intrigued by the mirror's history, Anna decided to restore it, hoping to uncover the secrets. She spent hours cleaning and reassembling the fragments, oblivious to the danger. As she worked, She began to feel a strange presence watching her, a cold breath on the back of her neck. One evening, while James was away, Anna finally completed the restoration. She stood back to admire her work, but as she gazed into the mirror, a shadowy figure appeared behind her. Frozen with fear, she watched as the figure's hand reached out from the glass, its cold fingers wrapping around her wrist. Anna screamed, breaking free from the entity's grip. She ran through the house, the shadow in pursuit. Desperate, she locked herself in Edward's old study, hoping to find some clue to banish the spirit. Among his journals, she found a passage detailing a ritual to trap the spirits within the mirror. With trembling hands, Anna performed the ritual, chanting the incantations Edward had written. The room filled with a blinding light, and the mirror began to vibrate violently. The shadowy figure appeared once more, its eyes burning with rage. But as Anna completed the final words, the figure was pulled back into the mirror, the glass sealing it away once more. Exhausted and shaken, Anna collapsed. When James returned, he found her in the study, the mirror shattered once again. She recounted her terrifying ordeal, and together they decided to bury the remains of the mirror deep in the woods, hoping to rid themselves of its curse forever. Hawthorne House was finally restored, and James and Anna lived there in peace. But the legend of the shadow in the mirror lived on in Ashwick, a cautionary tale of the dangers of delving into the unknown and the darkness that can linger in the reflections of the past. Story 7. The Haunting of Elmwood Asylum. Elmwood Asylum stood on the outskirts of town, an imposing structure with high stone walls and iron gates. Abandoned for decades, it was a place of local legend where whispers of ghostly apparitions and unsettling sounds kept people away. Few dared to venture near, and those who did often returned with tales of terror. The asylum had a dark history. Built in the late 1800s, it housed the mentally ill and those deemed socially unfit. Dr. Victor Harland, the asylum's head physician, was infamous for his unorthodox and often cruel methods. He believed in harsh treatments, subjecting patients to isolation, electroshock therapy, and experimental surgeries. Many patients died under his care, and their restless spirits were said to haunt the halls. Leela Thompson, a young and ambitious journalist, arrived in town to investigate the rumors. Fascinated by the asylum's sinister past, she decided to spend a night within its walls, hoping to uncover the truth. Armed with a flashlight, a camera, and a recorder, she entered the crumbling building just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Inside, the air was thick with decay and the scent of mold. Peeling paint and broken furniture littered the floors. Leela moved cautiously, her footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. She felt an eerie presence, as if unseen eyes were watching her every move. As she explored, she found old patient records scattered about, detailing the horrific treatments and the names of those who perished. One name, in particular, stood out: Evelyn Hart, a young woman committed for hysteria in 1902. Her record indicated she was subjected to especially brutal treatments and died under mysterious circumstances. Leela set up her equipment in what was once the main treatment room. She began recording, recounting the asylum's history and the tragic fate of its patients. As she spoke, the temperature dropped and the room grew cold. Suddenly, her flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. A soft whisper filled the air, barely audible but unmistakable. "Help me," it said. Leela's heart pounded as she scanned the room. Her flashlight caught a glimpse of a figure standing in the corner, a woman in a tattered gown, her face pale and eyes hollow. "Who are you?" Leela asked, her voice trembling. The figure didn't respond, but began to move closer, her footsteps silent. Leela backed away, but the woman continued her approach, reaching out a hand as if to touch her. Panicking, Leela grabbed her recorder and fled the room, the sound of her own breathing loud in the empty halls. She raced down the corridor, the woman's apparition following her. As she reached the main entrance, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. trapping her inside. Desperate, Leela searched for another exit but found only locked doors and boarded windows. In her frantic search, she stumbled upon Dr. Harlan's office. The room was in disarray, with papers and books strewn about. On the desk, she found Harlan's journal, its pages filled with details of his experiments and the torment he inflicted on his patients. Among the entries, she discovered notes about Evelyn Hart. Harlan believed she was possessed and conducted cruel rituals to cure her. Leela realized that Evelyn's spirit was trapped, seeking justice for the horrors she endured. Determined to help, she returned to the main treatment room, her resolve strengthening despite the fear gripping her heart. She called out to Evelyn, asking how she could free her. The apparition appeared once more, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Burn the journal," she whispered. "Destroy his legacy." With shaking hands, Leela retrieved the journal from Harlan's office and lit it on fire. The flames consumed the pages, filling the room with acrid smoke. As the last of the journal turned to ash, a sense of calm washed over the asylum. The temperature returned to normal, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Evelyn's spirit appeared one final time, a faint smile on her lips. "Thank you," she whispered before fading into the darkness. The next morning, Leela emerged from Elmwood Asylum, exhausted but victorious. She had uncovered the truth and helped a tormented soul find peace. Her story was published, shedding light on the atrocities committed within the asylum's walls and ensuring that the spirits of Elmwood would no longer haunt the living. Elmwood Asylum was eventually demolished, and a memorial was erected in its place, honoring those who suffered and died there. Leela's bravery brought closure to the town, and the haunting whispers of the past were finally silenced. Story 8: The Haunted Lighthouse. On the rugged coastline of Cornwall, the old Blackrock Lighthouse stood sentinel against the crashing waves of the Atlantic. The lighthouse, weathered by centuries of storms, had guided countless ships to safety. However, it was also the site of numerous mysterious disappearances and inexplicable events, leading locals to believe it was haunted. The legend began with the lighthouse's first keeper, Captain Jonathan Hargrove. Captain Hargrove was a retired sea captain who took the job to find peace after a lifetime at sea. He lived in the lighthouse with his wife, Eliza, and their young daughter, Clara. The family was well liked by the villagers, who often visited them. One stormy night, a shipwreck occurred near the lighthouse. Despite Captain Hargrove's best efforts to guide the ship to safety, it was dashed against the rocks. The captain and his family worked tirelessly to save the crew, but only a few survived. Among the dead was a young sailor who bore an uncanny resemblance to Captain Hargrove. Haunted by the loss and the eerie resemblance, Captain Hargrove began to change. He became obsessed with the shipwreck and spent hours staring out to sea, convinced that the ghosts of the lost sailors were trying to communicate with him. Eliza and Clara grew increasingly worried about his mental state. One fateful night, during another violent storm, Captain Hargrove was found dead at the base of the lighthouse, his body broken as if he had fallen from the top. His face was twisted in terror, eyes wide open, much like the unfortunate sailors from the wreck. Eliza and Clara were devastated, and the villagers whispered about a curse. After Captain Hargrove's death, Eliza took over the duties of the lighthouse keeper. She was determined to maintain the beacon in honor of her husband. However, strange occurrences began to plague the lighthouse. The beacon would flicker and die without explanation, and Eliza would hear whispers and cries in the wind. One night, Clara vanished without a trace. Eliza searched desperately, but her daughter was never found. The villagers believed the spirits of the sea had claimed another victim. Heartbroken, Eliza left the lighthouse, never to return. The lighthouse stood abandoned for many years, a dark silhouette against the stormy sky. In the decades that followed, those who ventured near the lighthouse reported seeing ghostly figures and hearing disembodied voices. The legend of the haunted lighthouse grew, with each retelling adding new details and embellishments. In the present day, a group of paranormal investigators decided to spend the night at Blackrock Lighthouse, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. Among them was Sarah, a historian with a deep interest in the lighthouse's history. She had spent years researching Captain Hargrove and his family, and she was determined to uncover the truth behind the hauntings. As the group set up their equipment, the wind howled, and the waves crashed violently against the rocks. The lighthouse seemed to come alive with the storm, its walls creaking and groaning. The investigators conducted EVP electronic voice phenomenon sessions, asking questions and recording the ambient sounds, hoping to capture voices from the beyond. Hours passed without any significant activity. Then, just after midnight, the temperature in the room dropped suddenly. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she saw a faint, ghostly figure at the top of the lighthouse stairs. It was a man, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, with a look of sorrow and despair on his face. She recognized him from the old photographs Captain Jonathan Hargrove. The ghostly figure began to descend the stairs, and the group watched in stunned silence. As he reached the bottom, he turned to Sarah and whispered, "Help me find my daughter." The voice was barely audible, but filled with pain and longing. Determined to help, Sarah and the team searched the lighthouse thoroughly. In a hidden room beneath the lighthouse, they discovered an old diary belonging to Eliza. The diary detailed her struggles after her husband's death and her belief that Clara was still alive, taken by the spirits of the sea. Armed with this new information, Sarah continued her research and eventually found records of a girl matching Clara's description in a nearby village, where she had been taken in by a kind family after being found wandering the shore. Clara had grown up believing she was an orphan. Sarah contacted Clara's descendants and shared the story. They were amazed to learn about their true heritage and decided to visit the lighthouse to pay their respects. On the night of their visit, the lighthouse beacon, long dormant, suddenly shone brightly, guiding their way. As they stood at the base of the lighthouse, the ghostly figure of Captain Hargrove appeared once more, this time with a look of peace. He nodded gratefully to Sarah and the family before slowly fading away. The haunting ceased, and the lighthouse stood as a monument to the enduring bond of family and the power of closure.